What if your biggest goals are just sophisticated ways to escape who you really are? You don't talk about it, not out loud, but sometimes, at night, in that thin space between scrolling and sleep, something stings. A quiet voice that whispers, "What are you really chasing?" And deeper still, who told you that success would make you feel whole? We rarely admit it, but some ambitions aren't dreams, they're exits. They don't pull us forward, they push us away. Away from our silence. Away from the versions of ourselves we buried because they were too soft, too tired, too honest. You're not aiming high, you're fleeing deep. You became the achiever, the planner, the fighter, not because you were whole, but because you were breaking. Not because you saw a future, but because you couldn't bear the past. And still, it worked. People admire your drive. They call you ambitious, focused, inspiring. They don't see the fracture. They don't feel the cost. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because to do that, you'd have to admit how much of you was left behind on the way up. The artist you silenced, the child who stopped dreaming, the part that only wanted peace. You buried them beneath performance and called it progress. But what if that dream you're chasing isn't yours anymore? What if it belongs to an older version of you, the one who just wanted to feel safe? You keep climbing, always climbing, but maybe the ladder isn't leaning on your life at all. Maybe you're scaling a mountain just to avoid what's at its base: stillness, grief, and the aching truth that your ambition might be built on exile. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who climbs upon the highest mountains laughs at all tragedies, real or imaginary." But what if the tragedy is this? You've become so good at surviving, you've forgotten how to return. So I ask you, what if the dream is real, but the dreamer is gone? And all this effort, all this hunger, is just a beautiful way of not looking in the mirror. You don't need answers right now, just presence. Because this isn't about quitting, it's about remembering. And maybe beginning again. It begins early, so the moment pain becomes too loud to bear and too invisible to explain. So you redirect. You become the one who tries harder, the one who never stops. Because movement feels safer than memory. Because building something new feels easier than facing what was never allowed to be. You think you're driven, but what if you're haunted? It's subtle. You don't call it trauma, you call it motivation. You don't say, "I'm escaping," you say, "I'm evolving." But beneath the spreadsheets, the goals, the long nights, there's a fracture. A younger version of you who made a silent decision. If I can just succeed enough, maybe I won't have to feel this again. And so ambition becomes a mask with perfect teeth, smiling, focused, forward. But underneath, the child still trembles. Most people won't see it, because you've built something impressive. But what they admire is distance, not depth. What they praise is the wall you've built between yourself and what still hurts. You became excellent at surviving. You turned your pain into productivity, and the world rewards you for it, not knowing that every milestone is just another mile away from where it began. Psychology doesn't always name this kind of ambition, but it's a survival strategy, one dressed in suits and accolades. It's not that you want more, it's that you need to keep moving, or else the silence might speak. You're not building a future, says the shadow. You're building distance from your past, and you know it. In the quietest moments, between meetings and medals, you feel it. The ache, the origin, the reason you started running in the first place. You never wanted to be impressive. You just didn't want to be forgotten. You just didn't want to feel like nothing ever mattered. And so, this is not failure, this is reckoning. Not a fall, but the moment you finally ask, "What am I running from?" Because some dreams are not beginnings, they are escapes, and even the fastest runner can't outrun themselves. You don't rest. You calculate pauses like threats. Even your silence feels like something to optimize. And when you finally stop, not because you want to, but because your body demands it, Guilt slips in like a thief. It whispers, "You should be doing more." But where did that voice come from? You weren't born with it. It was built, layer by layer, moment by moment. Every time you were seen more for what you did than who you were, applauded when you achieved, invisible when you simply existed. So you adjusted. You became a master of performance, not on a stage, but in life. Grades, smiles, deadlines, perfection. You didn't feel worthy, so you performed worthiness. And when it worked, when they praised you, it felt like oxygen. But it was never peace, just permission to breathe for a while. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to survive the world. But masks are heavy, especially when they start to replace your face. Now, you don't know who you are without the role, without the productivity, without the admiration. You feel lazy when you rest because your self-worth has been married to movement. Stillness doesn't feel like peace. It feels like failure. You're not living, you're auditioning, and the role keeps getting bigger while you get smaller. Every achievement feels like a fix, temporary, fleeting, demanding the next, and no one sees the cost, because the performance is flawless, but perfection is a prison built from applause. And the more they cheer, the more you disappear. So ask yourself gently, who would you be if no one were watching? If there were no stage, no script, no need to prove? Would you still exist in your own eyes? Or have you become a stranger behind the mask you built to survive? At first, it felt right. There was clarity, fire, urgency. You chose the goal, or so you thought. And for a while, it gave you direction. It made the mornings easier. It gave your pain a shape, and that was enough. But now something's shifted. The fire has cooled. The urgency feels hollow. You keep going. Not because you believe, but because you don't know what else to do. What no one tells you is that dreams have lifespans. They're born from who we were, not who we're becoming. And when the version of you who needed that dream disappears, what's left is a ghost. A goal you no longer recognize, but still obey. You set that dream years ago. But did you ever stop to grieve the person who set it? They were younger, maybe angrier, maybe more afraid. They needed success to feel visible. They needed recognition to silence the echo of being ignored. But you're not them anymore. And chasing what they needed might now be costing what you are. The dissonance grows. The goal still stands, but your body resists. You tell yourself you're procrastinating, undisciplined, lazy, but maybe it's none of that. Maybe you're just no longer aligned with the reason you started. You're not stuck, you're loyal. Loyal to a dream that no longer fits the person you became. And that loyalty, that quiet devotion to an outdated version of yourself, isn't strength. It's a kind of self-abandonment. So now the question isn't how do I keep going, it's what part of me am I betraying by refusing to pause? Because sometimes the bravest act isn't climbing further. It's sitting down and asking, do I still want what I once needed? You arrived, or at least they said you did. The title, the recognition, the quiet nods of approval from people who never really knew you. And yet, something inside you didn't move. It didn't celebrate, it didn't exhale, because what you reached wasn't what you were really reaching for. This is the silent tragedy of ambition without contact. You get what you wanted and feel more alone than before. It's not the goal that betrayed you. It's the illusion that once you achieved it, the emptiness would leave. You weren't chasing a trophy. You were chasing a feeling, a sense of wholeness, of finally being enough, of being seen, not just noticed, but truly seen. But now the applause fades and the old voice returns. The one that says, you're still not there. The one that questions everything you sacrificed to get here. You begin to understand the cost, that the version of success you inherited was built on someone else's hunger, that all this striving, all this proving, was a hope wrapped in performance. The hedonic treadmill, they call it. Run faster, achieve more. But the scenery never changes, because the real hunger isn't for success. It's for recognition that reaches beneath the skin. You're chasing recognition to silence the voice that says, "I never felt seen," and your soul knows it. It has known it for a long time, that success is not meaning, that validation is not love, that applause doesn't quiet the parts of you that were never invited to speak. So now, in the silence after the win, in the stillness after the race, what remains? Only you. And the question that never stopped echoing, was any of this ever about me? Or have I just mastered the art of becoming who others applaud, while forgetting the sound of my own name? You keep moving. You smile at the right moments. You answer the questions, deliver the work, make the plans. On the outside, it all functions, but inside, something is quietly cracking. You've been taught that growth means effort, that to evolve is to struggle forward, endlessly. But no one warned you. Effort without emotional truth is erosion, a slow, smiling suicide disguised as discipline. You wake up to calendars and commitments. You water your goals like a garden, but what grows there doesn't nourish you. It looks beautiful. It looks right, but you're starving because none of it touches the part of you that aches. None of it sees the part of you that's screaming. And deep down, you know, this isn't progress. It's performance. There's a difference between working hard and working hollow, between being driven by purpose and being driven by fear of stopping. You've become fluent in functioning, in making things happen, but you've lost the thread, the connection between what you do and who you are. And that gap, that growing silence between action and authenticity, is where your spirit starts to dim. Ambition without self-contact is a betrayal wrapped in productivity. It's chasing a version of success that looks like liberation, but feels like exile. You don't need to do less. You need to return to the part of you that can no longer bear to pretend. The part of you that whispers at night, "I can't keep feeding a life that leaves me empty." Because a life built on disconnection will always collapse, not in noise, but in the quiet resignation of a soul that once believed there was more, and still does, beneath the ruin. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. You blame yourself for the pauses, for the fatigue, for the days when the fire goes out and all that's left is silence. You tell yourself you're lazy, that you just need more discipline, that if you could just push harder, stay focused, fix the chaos, everything would align. But what if your body isn't sabotaging you? What if it's protecting you? You're not lazy. You're tired of performing a version of yourself you never chose. You weren't born to hustle. You were born whole. Before the world taught you to confuse self-worth with output. Now, your nervous system is screaming, but in a language you weren't taught to understand. Procrastination, resistance, exhaustion. These aren't flaws, they're signals. Messages from the parts of you that remember what authenticity feels like. That ache for a rhythm you no longer allow. You think it's a discipline problem, but what you're calling lack of willpower might actually be a refusal, a quiet, unconscious rebellion against the constant betrayal of your own truth. Neuropsychology calls it cognitive dissonance. But in human terms, it's simpler. You can't force yourself to become someone you don't believe in. You've learned how to push, how to endure, but not how to listen. And that listening, that sacred return to inner alignment, is the difference between persistence and self-abandonment. You don't lack ambition, you lack a reason to keep performing a role you never chose. And maybe that's the turning point. Not more effort, not more goals, but the quiet, radical act of asking, what part of me is tired of pretending, and what would it mean to finally stop? You wake up and reach for motion. Emails, notifications, to-do lists. Even your breath feels rushed, like there's something chasing you, or maybe something you're trying not to meet. Stillness used to be natural, now it feels unbearable. Because in the silence, something returns. A question you've buried under years of progress. Why am I doing this? Not the surface reasons, the job, the dream, the responsibilities, but the deeper why, the one you used to hear as a child before the noise began, before productivity became a drug that numbed everything too honest to face. They call it hustle, they call it ambition, but sometimes it's just avoidance in disguise, an addiction to noise so the echoes don't catch up. You think you fear failure, but that's not the truth. You fear stopping because when you stop, the fortress falls, and inside the ruins, you find yourself. Philosophers knew this terror well. Montaigne once wrote, "We are never at home with ourselves." That's why we build castles of activity, to protect us from the intimacy of our own presence. Your to-do list is not evil, it's just a wall, a beautifully structured wall, behind which you've hidden your questions, your longing, your grief. You fear being left behind, but what you really fear is finally being alone with the truth. And maybe that truth isn't catastrophic. Maybe it's just quiet, just unfamiliar. Maybe it says, "You've been strong for too long. Now be still and remember who you were before you started running." There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, when the speed begins to feel meaningless. You're moving fast, achieving more, checking every box, but something inside you has stopped participating. That's the fracture. When action continues, but the soul stays still. You thought purpose would feel like fire, like something urgent, burning, unrelenting. But the deeper it gets, the quieter it becomes. Real purpose doesn't scream, it waits. Not ahead, but behind, in the place you stopped looking, not in the spotlight, but in the echo of what you forgot to honor. You don't find it by chasing, you feel it in the stillness. When the noise dies down, and you finally hear your own footsteps returning to something real. Jung called it individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole again. Not through perfection, but through integration. Not through masks, but through memory. And in that return, something shifts. The weight you've been carrying starts to dissolve, not because the work disappears, but because the work begins to feel like yours. You stop running, you start remembering, not who the world wanted, but who you were before the world intervened. You don't need a new dream, you need to meet the real dreamer beneath the mask. And when you do, the chase ends, not in defeat, but in reunion. You arrive, not at a finish line, but at yourself, unrushed, unimpressive to anyone but your own soul, and for the first time, that is enough. Not all dreams are illusions. Some are sacred, born from the raw core of who you are before survival redefined your direction. But when dreams become disguises, when they exist only to shield you from what's unhealed, they lose their truth. They become escape routes dressed as purpose. And yet, even that is not wrong, because every form of escape was once a form of protection and ambition. Even misguided was your attempt to stay alive, to matter, to feel something that didn't hurt. Carl Jung spoke of integration, not rejection. He didn't ask you to burn your ambition. He asked you to hold it in your hands, to let it fall if it must, and see what's real underneath. Because what's real can survive the fall. What's real never needed applause. What's real waits in the quiet, in the version of you who still remembers how to be whole without earning it. You don't have to stop dreaming, but you must stop fleeing. Let the mask slip, let the ladder fall, not as failure, but as the first act of returning. Pain doesn't mean the dream is wrong. It means it's missing your truth. It means you built something beautiful, but forgot to build it from your own reflection. Nietzsche said, "Become who you are, not who they expect, not who you perform, but the self that waited, silently, beneath all your effort." You were never meant to conquer the mountain. You were meant to remember why you started climbing, so let this be the moment, not of collapse, but of clarity. You are not lazy. You are not lost. You are just tired of chasing what was never meant to save you. And yes, there is still time to dream differently.